Next, I would like to introduce Reverend Nobuaki Hanaoka. He was born on December 25th, 1944 in the Nagasaki prefecture. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, Hanaoka was 8 months old. His mother and brother died of leukemia by the time he was 7 years old. After graduating from the Kanto Gakuen University Graduate School of Theology in Yokohama, he traveled to the U.S. He graduated from Crozer Theological Seminary in Rochester, New York. He also attended the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He served United Methodist Churches in Alameda, San Francisco, Sacramento, and Berkeley. He retired from the active ministry in 2007. He is also the author of On the Back of a Buffalo, Eastern Stories for a Western Journey.
My name is Nobuaki Hanaoka. As Melanie indicated, I was born on December 25th, 1944. I was a Christmas baby. When the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki on August the 9th, 1945, at 11:02 a.m., I was only 8 months old. I was too young to remember or to witness the devastation of the city. Our family lived miles away from the city, and we were not affected by the immediate impact of the explosion. When the atomic bomb exploded, the immediate impact was the blast, which was a sudden expansion of the air, which knocked down almost all the buildings, and many were crushed under the fallen buildings or hit by the flying debris. Then came an enormous fireball whose surface temperature reached 13,000 degrees Fahrenheit, twice as hot as the surface of the sun. It grew larger and larger in midair. When it touched the ground, it incinerated everything in its way. Those who were caught by the fireball instantly evaporated, and many others were severely burned. I'm sure you have seen the horrific pictures of burned victims, like ghostly figures, in procession begging for water. They came the invisible, soundless radiation. Silently, it spread into the atmosphere and came down in the black rain, contaminating both the air and the city reservoirs. Those who survived the impact of the blast and the fire still had to breathe and also to drink. Both water and air were contaminated with radiation. Whether inhaled or ingested, the radiation went into the body and remained in the bone marrow for many years. It destroyed your immune system and began to make you sick and die slow and painful death. Their symptoms were very much like those of HIV/AIDS. Although we cannot determine the exact number of casualties of the radiation poisoning over the years, it could have been tens or hundreds of thousands. When my father returned home from the military duties in Taiwan, he moved us out of the Nagasaki area to Kumamoto and then on to Fukuoka. But in a few years, the invisible radiation began to kill my family. When I was 6, my mother died. As far back as I can remember, she was always in bed, looking pale and weak. Within the same year, my eldest sister died, also of leukemia. She too looked pale and was always in bed in my memory. And 20 years later, my brother died of a mysterious illness. When the doctors performed the autopsy, they found that his internal organs had deteriorated as in an elderly man. I suspected that it had to do with radiation too. We were not supposed to tell anybody that we lived near Nagasaki when the bomb exploded, because there was a great deal of prejudice against us survivors. It was rumored that if you had been exposed to radiation, no one will hire you or marry you, because you never know when you get sick. Besides, your unborn children may be affected too. Years later, when my son was born, the first thing I asked the doctor was, "Does he have all the 5 fingers?" Doctor smiled and said, "Yes, he's perfect." What a relief that was. The day my sister died, I happened to overhear a conversation between her doctor and my father. Having lost 2 loved ones in a row, my father wanted to know what was going to happen to the rest of the family. So he asked the doctor about me, the youngest. And the doctor said, if your youngest one was exposed to the radiation the same way as his mother and sister, he may not live to see his 10th birthday. I was only 6, and I did not know how to process such a thought. I became depressed and withdrawn. I could not speak for a few months. Fortunately, my 10th birthday came and went without an incident. I felt relieved, but I began to question why the good people like my mother and my sister had to die, and I, good for nothing, am still alive. Later, I learned that such feelings were quite common among survivors and was called the survivor's guilt. So I grew up with apologizing for being alive all the time. I developed a very low self-esteem. Nuclear weapons make those who were exposed to radiation suffer physically, mentally, and socially for many years after the bombing. Nuclear weapons are the most inhumane, immoral weapons of indiscriminate machine of mass murders. In fact, of global annihilation. They should never be allowed to exist on Earth. When I was a young pastor at a Methodist church in Alameda, I met Mr. Kanji Kuramoto, who was also a resident of Alameda. He was the chairman of the Committee of Atomic Bomb Survivors. And through him, I met many Hibakshas, or A-bomb survivors in Northern California. With some community activists and supporters, we formed a group called Friends of Hibaksha. It was primarily a support group for the local survivors. We found that survivors had to tell someone about horrifying stories of surviving the nuclear holocaust from time to time for their mental health. But their families were sick and tired of hearing the same old stories, because the Hibaksha did not want to annoy their families by repeating why they are still haunted. Hibakshas had to get together with other Hibakshas who understood. We conducted an oral history project. We sat down with each survivor and tape recorded their stories. We transcribed the tapes and made them available to the researchers. What we learned was that they all felt that those who died instantly in the blast or in the fire were the lucky ones, because they were spared of the long and painful struggles with radiation. 75 years ago, the US was the only country that had the nuclear weapons. Despite the opposition of conscientious scientists. The US decided to continue the nuclear weapons program as they thought it would serve as a deterrent. But it only took 3 years for the Soviet Union to develop its own nuclear bomb, followed by the UK, France, China, Pakistan, and India. At around the same time, Israel developed their own nuclear weapons, although they have not admitted it. It was also suspected that Iran was developing nuclear weapons to counter Israel's threat. The US nuclear weapons program did not serve as a deterrent, but accelerated the proliferation of nuclear weapons worldwide. Furthermore, the world has now entered the age of thermonuclear weapons, or hydrogen bombs, that are at least 1,000 times more powerful than the conventional nuclear bombs. Atomic bombs that reduce the two beautiful cities into ashes, killing nearly 250,000 people, and left so much pain and misery for so long, were only 15 and 20 kilotons, respectively. Today, the standard size of nuclear bomb is 1 megaton, 1 million tons of TNT. The largest bomb we have today is a Russian-made hydrogen bomb called Za-Bomba, which yields 50 megaton of TNT, 50 million tons of TNT. Such a bomb can bring a global catastrophic devastation and will annihilate the human civilization as we know it. The whole world was alarmed by the madness of the global pursuit of such weapons. And in 1968, the United Nations passed the Resolution for Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. A total of 191 states have signed it. The stated purpose of the treaty was not only to prevent further proliferation of nuclear weapons, but also to eventually abolish all nuclear weapons. However, the process was very slow. The conscientious people in the world wanted to send the message to the US and Russia, who own 90% of the world nuclear stockpile, and 7 other states that have nuclear weapons, that we want them to begin negotiation to abolish all nuclear weapons. In 2017, finally, the International Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty, received a majority vote in the United Nations General Assembly. It is the first comprehensive, legally binding treaty, but is not in force yet, as none of the 9 states armed with nuclear weapons has signed it. The treaty was a result of the activism of such grassroots organizations as International Campaign for Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is a global coalition of peace-seeking, peace-loving civic organizations. And I demand, along with the people all over the world, that the US ratifies and sign the Nuclear Weapons Ban Treaty and begin taking leadership in demolishing all the nuclear weapons in the world. What I fear today is the fact that our president is so horrifyingly casual about nuclear weapons. During the presidential campaign, candidate Trump called for Japan and South Korea to arm themselves with their own nuclear weapons to defend themselves from the threat of North Korea and China. Once elected, he ordered the Pentagon to re-establish America's overwhelming nuclear superiority over Russia and China. Realizing that China has been testing their nuclear weapons in Xinjiang province in violation of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and Russia has developed hypersonic missile in violation of the Bilateral Armed Reduction Treaty. President Trump, instead of negotiating with them to make them stop their violation, has proposed the US to resume nuclear tests and order the production of more nuclear arsenals. Thus, we're back into the nuclear arms race as it was in the Cold War. And the fear of nuclear winter has become real again. When we resume negotiations with North Korea and Iran, as we must, it will be the greatest opportunity to move toward the global abolition of nuclear weapons. The world knows that as long as the US maintains its nuclear superiority, we have no moral ground to demand other states to disarm. Our negotiations will be seen only as an effort to keep our nuclear advantage. It only takes the US president to invite all 9 nuclear weapon states to a table of negotiation and start discussing dismantling of all their nuclear weapons. We know that no one can win a nuclear war. We have been too quiet and complacent, but now we must rekindle the vision and activism for a peaceful and nuclear-free world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We had a few questions that were submitted separately, and if anybody else has any questions, feel free to submit them into the Q&A section right now. One of our first questions that we have for you, Reverend Hanaoka, is in what ways has your faith guided you through these past 75 years? This question was submitted by Jane Muramoto Young.
Excuse me, repeat that again?
In what ways has your faith guided you through these past 75 years?
Oh, my faith. Well, you know, I was raised as a Christian from the time of kindergarten. I always attended a church service. But on the other hand, the faith didn't really sink in because I was always feeling guilty about myself, about being alive. And I think it was around the time of high school, junior. It always, all of a sudden hit me that maybe God had something for me to do instead of feeling bad about myself. Be strong and then take faith and have faith and move forward for the elimination of nuclear weapons. That's how transformation came to be. And then I was baptized and became a serious person, Christian.
Thank you. We have another question from Jane Muramoto Young. She asks, over the decades, has your sense for global peace changed? Are you more pessimistic now? Are you more optimistic? Are you the same? Have you not changed your view?
Well, we can't afford to be pessimistic because once we start giving up our hope, peace won't come. And I think we need to keep fighting for peace, compassion, and nuclear-free world. And because of the enormous risk that we have by possessing nuclear weapons, we just can't stop fighting. That's how I feel.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you think about the US leaving the Iran nuclear deal?
Well, I was very disappointed, of course. They could have kept the deal, and then whatever shortcomings that they had, they should have improved it. But anyway, what they saw as a shortcoming was a 15-year limit to the stoppage of the nuclear program, Iran nuclear program. But everyone expected that their nuclear programs will not be resumed after 15 years because of the enormous financial cost to develop such weapons. But besides, we would have been able to resume the discussion to further prohibit their nuclear programs. So I was disappointed to hear that we just walked out of the deal that took years of serious negotiations, including 5 other nations.
Thank you. We have a question from one of our audience members, Franco. They ask, what is your advice to young people for spreading the message of peace?
No, the question is, what is your vision of the world in the future? I always tell them my vision is a peaceful, compassionate, loving, caring world. And I think we need to keep that vision clearly. And also to say that, instead of letting other people to worry about it, I think we should be the actors to make it happen by starting being peaceful, compassionate, loving, caring individuals. But this is not just a personal thing, but it's a global thing. And I want you to start. Well, first of all, I think you need to understand how terrible nuclear weapons are, how dangerous it is. And then work toward elimination of such weapons.
Thank you. Let's see. One of our audience members is wondering how you feel because there are so many 75th anniversary celebrations in the Bay Area. There's a lot of awareness about the 75th anniversary of the bombings. Does that bring you any hope of any good changes that could be coming in the future? Or do you think that it's potentially not enough? Do you have a particular call to action for us?
Well, I think it is important to become part of a group that work toward peace and disarmament. It is wonderful that there are so many events commemorating the 75th anniversary. But at the same time, what is really bad is war. Of course, atomic bombs was really bad. But what was really bad was the war itself. And we have to make sure that there's no more war. We have to find a way to negotiate peace and respect each other's needs and desires and support each other, in the higher level as well. I think peacemaking starts from each individual heart. So that's my feeling.
Thank you. I think that's really important. We're almost out of time, so our last question will be from Franco, one of our audience members. He says that there is so much anger and frustration right now. Do you think that these emotions can be useful in the fight for peace?
I think so. You know, we have many serious problems. One is a global warming. Our environment is deteriorating, and nuclear weapons are as bad as the global warming. And then we have this pandemic. People are frustrated because, there are so many existential issues in the world, and we don't seem to be attacking these issues effectively anyway. So I think we need to be aware of what global issues are and what personal community issues are, and then work on each of these issues carefully and also hopefully. If you give up our hope, we're not going to go anywhere. So it is important to be able to hope no matter what. Anger does not produce anything positive.